Hi, welcome to another wellness webinar by Live Healthy Miami Gardens Live. I am your host, Melissa P. Dunn, CEO of MD Marketing Network, and also a member of the Live Healthy Miami Gardens Communications Subcouncil. Welcome to another wellness webinar conversation. As you know, we are in the middle of National Influenza Vaccination Week. You just saw a video highlighting all of the activities that we have scheduled for the city of Miami Gardens this week. Now, so far, we've been hosting free screening events and free vaccination events at our provider locations throughout Miami Gardens, where you can get a free flu shot as well as a COVID-19 vaccination. And on Tuesday, we had a conversation with a resident, a member of our faith-based community who also happened to be a nurse, as she was sharing her story around COVID-19. You know, she lost her dear aunt, and she has seen countless patients suffer from COVID-19. And so that brought up a lot of questions about how do you manage grief? How do you process it? How do you have conversations with your children around COVID-19 and the flu and all of the emotional upheaval that comes with living within a pandemic environment? So today, I invited a clinical social worker to come and have a conversation with us. She has over 10 years experience doing grief counseling. In fact, she was a part of the crisis response team for the Parkland tragedy 2 years ago. Put your hands together virtually and help me welcome a licensed clinical social worker from Banyan Health System, Miss Megan Betancourt. Hi, Megan. Welcome to the conversation.
Hi, thank you for having me.
You know, I'm so grateful that you were available at such short notice to join us in Miami Gardens for this very important conversation. Megan, tell us a little bit about your background.
So I am a licensed clinical social worker by trade, and I have been doing child and family therapy for a little over 10 years now. I graduated from Barry University, and prior to that from the University of Florida, so Florida home and grown. And I have been working with Banyan for a little over 4 years in all different capacities, but all absolutely community-based, working with, Miami and Broward County, the families and the children and even the adults that we serve in both primary care and behavioral health.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Now, you know, this is such stressful time. I mean, even for me, um, the pressure of being in a pandemic type environment, it can be very depressing. What tips do you have for just surviving and taking care of your mental wellness right now?
Sure. So we have seen just a major uptick in behavioral health and mental health issues with the COVID-19 pandemic. Obviously, things have gotten better, if I'll use that term very loosely. But from the start of just really having to quarantine and not being in social settings, that's not really the natural condition for most of us. And so it definitely has prompted a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression. Almost everyone throughout the country has somehow been touched by the pandemic, if not themselves, but by losing someone that they know, someone that they love. And so it's definitely affected all of our mental states.
Yeah, I mean, I tell you, for me, it's been a challenge, and I'm out every day. I mean, the nature of my work means that I'm out and interacting with people and interacting in the community. And now that it's another flu season on top of the pandemic, I am really being very diligent in making sure that I take care of my well-being. Um, but it may not always be like that for those who are suffering a loss.
Yes. Absolutely. So, I mean, the first thing I'll say is, and we often say this in the behavioral health world, and I'm sure in the medical world as well, you can't take care of others if you can't take care of yourself, right? And so, one of the most important things for us is to be very aware of when you're struggling, when you're going through something, and really prioritizing your own mental and physical health first and foremost, and what that kind of looks like for each person, because it is different. But just, constant check ins to make sure that you are okay, and being okay with not being okay, right? And that is a very big
Oh,
piece, both physically and
wow.
mentally.
I want to pause right there. Being okay with not being okay. Because, a lot of us we pride ourselves on being strong, especially women, right? We're constantly taking care of other people. How is it possible to be okay with not being okay?
I think giving ourselves a little grace and understanding we're all human, none of us are perfect, and really just I always come from the lens of I just can't help others if I'm not okay myself. So having the strength to admit when I have to take a break, right? When I have to just take a pause, and be mindful and respectful of myself, my time, my energy, right? My physical well-being, so that I can then in turn help others. And that is a big piece, especially in our medical community, our behavioral health community, where we are inundated with this pandemic, with flu season, with people not being okay. It's around us all the time. So
Mhm.
allowing yourself just a little grace, a little space. In grief work, we call it holding space. When you just allow someone to not be okay, to break down, to be sad, to feel anxious, to feel angry. And so oftentimes the most difficult thing is to do that for yourself.
Oh wow, yeah, you know what? I could really see that. And kind of making sure that you're doing the things that fill your cup first, right?
Yes, absolutely. If we're not fulfilled, we can't fulfill other people.
Yeah. For me, I like to go to the ocean. In fact, that's exactly where I went this morning. I go to the ocean and I walk in the water and I watch the sunrise. And it always seems to calm me and give me a sense of peace and also energy for me to come and tackle the day. So I agree with you. Being okay with not being okay and taking care of yourself and filling your own cup and so that you can give from your overflow. That's really powerful advice, Megan. What kind of advice would you give? So the person that we spoke to on Tuesday, she is a first responder and she lost her dear aunt to COVID. And when we do our candlelight vigil on Sunday at Betta T. Ferguson, we're going to be meeting with 9 different faith-based organizations, and a lot of people are going to share their story. Um, what like how what's the first thing that we should do if we're suffering a loss?
So I think that's a two-part question, right? So for ourselves, when we're suffering a loss, I kind of go back to that being okay with not being okay. And so what we know is that the stages of grief are different for everyone, right? If there's anything that research has showed us, it's that the 5 stages of grief that we kind of learned as back 20 years ago, it all still holds true, but the journey is not the same. There's not a sequential order of grief. There's not, it looks very different, and it's going to depend on who you've lost, right? The proximity to you, and also how you kind of what's in that cup already that you have filled. What are your coping skills? How do you deal with these kinds of things? And that's going to be different for every human. But when we're talking about helping other people through grief, that's a little different. I think our natural inclination is to give condolences, right? Which is totally appropriate and kind of the right way of saying things to someone out loud when words can't explain how sorry we are for what someone's going through. But the next question should be, what can I do to help you? Right? What can I do to help? Is it
Mm.
making you a meal and dropping it off at your front door? Is it just allowing you to take a break from your kids so you can have a quiet place to cry? It's often we forget to ask how we can help, and we just get caught up in the saying I'm sorry or my condolences for someone. It's also great to volunteer to help, right? Someone who's grieving
Wow.
won't always ask. So sometimes asking, can I bring you dinner, may not be as helpful as just saying, hey, I'm bringing you dinner. You can freeze it, you can eat it, do whatever you want with it. Like, it's just here to help. I'm literally here to support you. And so being the volunteer in a crisis like that, when you're not the one who's in the midst of the grieving can be very helpful to the people around you.
Wow, that's such a good point, Megan. Because I don't know what to say, so I always like, okay, my condolences. I'm so sorry, sending you prayers and love. But then to take it that next step and say, all right, I'm dropping off food for your family. So you're saying don't ask, can I bring you something? Just bring it to them.
So you always want to be respectful of people. So I would frame it in a question, but be very apparent you're volunteering, right? So I would like to bring you food. I'd like to bring you something. I know you must be inundated with, phone calls and people. And would it be okay if I drop something by your house? Or if it's, if it's a closer person, like a close family member, you might say something like, listen, I think it would be helpful for you to have some time to grieve yourself. Would you be okay with me hanging out with the kids for a little bit so you can just kind of have some time on your own? So just volunteering that, still phrased in a question to be respectful of that person's belief system, how they grieve, whatever their cultural preferences might be for that time, because it's very different for each culture. But definitely kind of volunteering that versus just asking, do you want me to do this? Because oftentimes people will say no, right? And that's just more of an anxiety piece that we don't want to ask for help. That's kind of our natural human condition. We don't want to say we're not okay and we need help.
Wow, that's a good advice. Yeah. And then sometimes if you ask it like that, I would imagine that's like another decision you're asking people to make at a time when they perhaps don't want to be making any decisions.
Right. And in a time that they've had to make so many decisions, right?
That's true.
And simple things you would think are simple, right? Like the color of a casket, is it wood? Do you want this one or this one? But decisions that no human ever wants to be making, right? So when you've been asked and kind of poked and prodded with questions for days and days leading up to like a funeral service, a vigil, things like that, honestly, you are so physically and emotionally exhausted. We really try to treat that similar to someone who's in crisis. So you take out the question, right? You take out the making someone make life decisions in a moment when they're just not prepared to make them, right? And allowed to volunteer information, to volunteer and offer things that can help.
So one of the things that I'm personally trying to navigate, I've had a couple of friends who've lost loved ones, and I sometimes don't know what to say, like after like the first couple of months. And I find that perhaps, I'm still present, but I'm not calling and saying, oh, let's go brunch the way that I normally do, because I don't want to be a nag. I don't want to be a burden. Like how should I navigate that?
So I think each individual is very different. People deal with grief very differently, right? So you have people who like to kind of be distracted, and that's the one that's going to want to go to brunch and going to want to be at brunch every weekend if possible. And then you have the people who really just want to sit and reflect and process and kind of are a little more introverted, if you will. I really think the answer is you just keep showing up, right? So you're right. The easiest time, and you don't realize it when you're in the middle of it, but the easiest time in the grief journey is the very beginning, when there's help everywhere, right? The hard part comes when the funerals are done, when the services are done, when mass is over. That is when people kind of forget, when they're not in the thick of it. And that's where things get difficult, when you don't have the check-in and people seeing how you're doing. I would say, even if it's not every week, but just a calendar reminder. Technology today is so easy. If it's a good friend, remind yourself to call them at least once a month and check in. Just how are you doing, right? And it doesn't have to always be about that loss. You don't have to call and say, how are you doing since your mom passed, right? It's not about that. It's just making sure that you're still present for that person, so that if and when they need to talk, you're there, right? They have someone that they can kind of lean on.
That's a good point. I think one of the things, I had a good friend that unfortunately, they lost a lot in New York when the pandemic was just kind of sweeping through that state. And one of the things that a group of us did was we set up, I guess, on one of these, not Uber Eats, but I forgot the name of the other one, but you're able to schedule food deliveries, and like a whole bunch of us took turns. And so for a whole month, their family had food being delivered from like 4 or 5 of us that took turns. So I guess something like that. And then maybe following up at least once a month, scheduling and saying, oh, how are you?
Yeah, absolutely. That constant check-in. And again, we're talking not the first month, but when you're 2 months and 3 months and 6 months out, anniversaries and birthdays, like that's very difficult that first year. And those are things sometimes people forget about, right? They're quick to kind of remove that from their calendar, right? Johnny's gone, so let me take it off of my calendar. Keep it on. Keep it on for another year or two, because the person who Johnny has left behind is the one that needs a phone call on that day. So just kind of being mindful of those special dates that can be very difficult. The holidays now are extremely difficult when you've lost someone. So being mindful of that.
Well, what kind of tips would you give for getting through the holidays? I would imagine that, wow. I mean, yeah.
It's difficult. And, it's unprecedented what we're going through as a community, right? This country and really the world. Every culture remembers things in their own way. To be honest, we grieve in our own way, and we have remembrance in our own way. I always say, especially with children, it's great to have something, right? Something to hold on to in those times. So often we'll do things, whether it's like planting a tree in the backyard or, creating a memory box of that person, something to just, when these difficult times come up, allow yourself, right, to have that space to remember that person in a positive light. And then, kind of move on from that, right? For that moment. So just allowing yourself in that special day some time. And whether that's holding on to something that makes you remember that person, or creating a space that is a remembrance place. Vigils are great examples of that, right? Just taking the time to say it's okay for a little bit to think back on these things and to think the good and the bad, right? But then when the service has ended, we have to work on how to cope and get back into our daily life, right? So creating those pause points throughout the first few years of grieving for someone is actually very important.
That's a really powerful way to look at it. So we're hosting on Sunday at Betty T. Ferguson at 5:30. We're actually hosting a community vigil, a candlelight vigil with 9 different faith-based organizations. Well, we're going to do that. We're going to pause. And we're going to remember, we're going to honor, and we're also going to celebrate people who recovered, because we have a lot of folks, not just in our community, but in our nation, who recovered from the flu, who recovered from COVID-19. And so we really want to come together as a community to celebrate that. But, as we were planning it, I didn't think about it the way that you just described it. I mean, I really just thought of it as a way for us to come together, but really it's a moment of pause.
Yeah. From the thick of life, right? We're so inundated with the news these days and with the statistics of what's going on. So just allowing us, kind of removing ourselves from the data and the facts and all the information we're being bombarded with, and just allowing that space, holding space. It's a very, very big topic in grief, holding space to feel what we need to feel. And that's going to be very different for everyone, but allowing that. And then when that time is done, how do you move forward? And so when we talk about things like COVID-19, when we talk about things like the flu, right? Some of the biggest things we can do is educate ourselves. What are the options we have out there? We have now gotten to a place where there are things you can do, right? All personal decisions you need to make, but things that you can potentially do to protect yourself and protect your family. And how can you do that, right? To better prepare so that this doesn't happen to someone again.
Good point. And yeah, we are going to make those resources available for anybody who wants to get a booster shot or a vaccine, whether it's for COVID or for the flu. We're going to make those opportunities available. And as always, they can go to livehealthymiamigardens.com for more information. But, we've been talking a lot about adults. But what about our babies? What about kids that are in school? I'm sure a lot of them are perhaps traumatized by this time that we're living in.
Absolutely. COVID really was a game changer for us. I think in most of our lifetime, children knew what it was to be sick, but it was not necessarily something like the flu was not something that they ever feared could be permanent, right? Could result in death. And so COVID really changed the scheme of that. And now, we often find children especially little children, but middle-aged children as well, that have a fear of like, mommy, you're sick. Does that mean you're going to the hospital? Right. And it could be a simple cold, but there's that true fear now around that. And so with children, as well as with adults, I always say one of the best things we can do is educate, right? Educating our children in a developmentally appropriate way. And so I know I mentioned to you earlier, and I'll say it in this venue, and I hope it can be a great resource. There are many resources out there to help educate our children in an appropriate way, right? So what we don't want to do is give kids too much information, because that can sometimes scare them. And so we want to give them what essentially the best advice is answer the question they give you. Whatever they ask you, answer that question. You don't need to go above and beyond and give them statistics of how many people have died or what has happened if they're not asking that, because sometimes too much information can be overwhelming for children. So there's resources out there, and one of the ones that I absolutely love, and actually Miami-Dade County is currently in a partnership with, is Sesame Street and Communities. So Sesame Street, the organization, actually has put out so many resources, tips, tricks on not just COVID and the flu and kind of physical health issues, but also on depression, on anxiety, on social skills, and what to do when you haven't been around people for months and now you're going back to school, and what do these things look like. And they have some amazing books and videos and just great tools and resources for parents that you can easily just pick up from the computer. There's even a downloadable version. They have an Instagram as well that gives you fun tips and tricks to parents and to educators to be able to provide that to children, to read a storybook, to watch a short film. And it's all with the characters we all love and know, Elmo and Big Bird, and those kind of household names that children instantly feel comfort in. There's a lot to be said about them being able to align with a character that they already know and feel comfortable with.
What's the name of the program again?
It's called Sesame Street in Communities. And I'll absolutely send that to you so you guys can share it through your Facebook.
Yeah, Sesame Street in Communities. Okay. All right. Fantastic. Maybe we can post that link in the chat so that anybody can get it later. So I like your tip when you say answer the question that the child is asking. I think that's really interesting. And I would imagine that if I were in that situation, I perhaps would be inclined to have diarrhea of the mouth and just keep talking. But the truth is, just meet them where they are and answer what they're asking.
Yeah. So what you're saying, Melissa, is exactly what most parents do, especially when it's a parent, right? So I often, and I'll share, as a clinician, I can sit and tell you what to do 100 different ways. But when it's my own daughter who has come up to me and said, Mom, please explain to me why this person died. I don't understand. They were so young. They weren't old, right? I also have to catch myself from having that kind of verbal diarrhea of the mouth. But we have to be, I don't want to say careful, mindful of the question in front of us, right? Children's brains are only so big, and they haven't experienced all that we have in the world, right? All the trauma, grief, the good and the bad of the world. So it's not that you're not telling the truth. You want to always tell the truth. It's just that you don't want to inundate their small mind with something that they're not ready to understand just yet. And allowing them to take the lead is honestly the best way to educate. Say, hey, you've heard a lot about this coronavirus or the flu. I've heard a few kids in your class are sick. Do you have questions? You can come to me with anything, and just allow them to lead that conversation instead of we love to come in and give a lot. But they'll really tell you what they need to know. They really will. They'll ask the things that they're curious about. And then just knowing that the conversation doesn't end there, right? Checking in with them every few days, every few weeks. Like, hey, I know we talked about this already, but do you have any more questions for me? I'm always here. I'm here to answer whatever questions you have. You can always come. And allowing them to know you won't always have the answer. And that's okay, right? So if mommy doesn't know the answer, mommy can get it for you, right? So I don't always know the answer, but I can help look for it. We can find out together, and that's okay too, right? For children, it's very humbling sometimes to know that we don't know everything, right? Things like COVID, like people dying from the flu, right? It's not the norm of life, and so it's okay to not know the answer, and it's okay for them to see you struggle with that answer. That's okay. They need to also see that we're human, right? That we very much also grieve and we go through these emotions. Now, you don't want to break down in front of your kid uncontrollably, but it is okay for you to be sad, and it's okay for you to tell them that, and it's okay for you to cry. Often as parents, we think we have to put on a brave face, or as family members, and that's not actually the case. It's okay for your child to see you grieve. Within a controlled environment. Like I said, you don't want to be completely inconsolable with your child. But it's okay for
that
them
might scare them, I would imagine.
Absolutely. But to see some emotion is absolutely okay. We want to be brave for them, but we also want them to know that it's okay to not be okay. And for children, the best way to do that is to show them by example.
So what happens if you can't, if your child is unable to verbalize how they feel? It's not everybody have the right words. Like what signs should we look for that they may be feeling some anxiety?
Sure. So, we parents are the expert of our children. Absolutely. We see them every day. We kind of know what their norm or their baseline looks like. And so the first thing I'd say is look for major changes, right? When you notice your child was doing well at school and now they're failing, or they got a note sent home from school that they acted out, something that's outside of their norm, that's where the red flag should really go off, right? And then you just start monitoring. You just really, hey, is everything okay? I think we're in a culture that we want our children to always do best, be best, and be on their best. And so sometimes a note home from school is an instant, why did this happen, right? We're quick to be almost defensive and make sure we correct the wrong. When children are grieving and when they've gone through a trauma, sometimes the more appropriate response is, hey, this isn't like you. Like what's going on? Is everything okay? Right? And asking. And when you see something and your gut tells you something's wrong, don't wait, right? So I always say, and I'm biased, but everyone in the world should get therapy. I'm a very biased human, right? That you can tell that's my livelihood. So everyone should get therapy. Everyone can benefit from therapy, right? It can never hurt. And that's what I tell parents. If your gut says something's wrong, if your gut thinks that something's wrong, do something, right? Call us, call Banyan, call your pediatrician, call somebody who can help you, someone who is an expert in this field. There are so many people out there, and there are so many resources in South Florida for both the insured and uninsured to get help. So don't just stop at saying, I think something's wrong, but make that phone call. There are experts that are willing to help you and help you navigate this time, which is so difficult. You may not have the answer. I can give you resources like Sesame Street in the community, but none of it is going to change the dynamic of having a professional sit in front of your child and help them, or sit in front of you if you need help, right? If you know that kind of no coping or distracting is working, it's okay to ask for extra help and learn when to use that lifeline.
That's such a powerful tip. Thank you, Megan, for coming on and shedding some light. I mean, you actually helped me too. And I do have a couple of check-in calls to make as a friend. And so thank you for that reminder. Do you have any final words of wisdom to share with us as we grieve as a community, whether you have personally suffered loss or not? Everyone in Miami Gardens, everyone in the state of Florida and around the world has experienced, I think, some sort of trauma as a result of this pandemic, because we have all collectively as a nation suffered loss.
Yeah. So if I could leave with one piece of advice, I'll say to our community is remember that you're not the only person who's probably lost something. And it's so important when we go through our day-to-day to remember that even the person in front of you who cut you off in traffic, or who jumped in front of you in line at Publix, could be grieving just as much or more than you. And so just being mindful that this pandemic has impacted us as a whole, right? Truly down to our core as humans. And just if each one of us tries to be a little better, a little nicer, have a little more holiday spirit, right? And be mindful that other people are going through trauma and going through grief as well, we'll be a better community for it.
Fantastic, powerful advice. Thank you so much, Megan. I appreciate you
You're
spending
welcome.
the afternoon with us. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right, Miami Gardens. Remember, on Sunday, we are going to come together as a community to celebrate those of us who have recovered from COVID-19 and the flu, as well as have a space, a pause, if you will, to remember and honor those who have lost. We are joining forces with 9 faith based communities to honor, remember, and celebrate each other. Please join us at Betty T. Ferguson on Sunday, the 12th, 5:30 p.m. At Betty T. Ferguson on December 12th. And we will be hosting an interfaith candlelight visual. I want to remind you, as always, that if you visit livehealthymiamigardens.com, we have a plethora of resources there, providers on standby right now to offer you not only mental wellness services and primary healthcare services, but also an opportunity for you to receive your booster shot, your COVID-19 vaccine, as well as a flu shot if you haven't already done it. We want to make sure that all of us in the city of Miami Gardens, we're all healthy and that we all access the resources that we need in order for us to collectively be a healthy community. So thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you hopefully on Sunday, 5:30 p.m. at Betty T. Ferguson. Remember, be kind and loving to yourself today. You deserve it.